Hello and welcome to my channel, Vice Rhino here. Today I'm looking at a video from Revelation TV in which two medical doctors discuss the finer points of physics, because if there's one thing you want your family doctor to be well versed in, it's how thermodynamic principles can be applied in theoretical physics, which is why they obviously spend so much time studying that in school. And again, this one is rather long and dull, so I will be cutting it very liberally, and it will be a bit disjointed as they have several different segments where they repeat themselves almost verbatim, so I just choose the ones that work best for me, but as a result they do jump between sets a few times. And as always, there will be a link in the description so you can verify for yourselves that I'm not pulling any dishonest editing trickery, so let's go!
And how we basically, we probably are going to annoy a few evolutionists out there, but I hope that we have more creationists who are watching than evolutionists.
And there you have it, the admission that I think should go along with almost every apologist video. They are not actually trying to convince people of their position, they just want to reassure people who already hold the same position as them. This isn't about reaching out and sharing the truth, it's about building a narrative. Thank you for being honest about it here, at least.
I mean, anybody who studies physics at O level or A level or any level will start off with the first and second law of thermodynamics.
Maybe the British system is different, but I'm pretty sure most high school physics classes start with Newtonian motion. Just a minor nitpick.
And the first law very simply says that energy and matter cannot be created or destroyed.
No, it doesn't. That's the colloquial shorthand for it. What it actually says is that the total energy of an isolated system remains constant. But you have to go with the colloquial shorthand, don't you? Because if you actually state the law in its proper form, it becomes apparent where the creationist is going wrong. But I'll let you make the argument before I address it.
I'll say it again. Energy and matter cannot be created or destroyed. Now, that of course causes massive problems to the evolutionists because they want the singularity which they talk about to create itself.
No, I don't want it to create itself. No theoretical physicist or cosmologist wants it to create itself. To put it simply, we don't currently know where the singularity that existed before the Big Bang came from. It's possible that it has always existed. It's possible that time was created at the beginning of the Big Bang, so to speak of a time before time is nonsensical. And bringing it back around to your misquote of the first law of thermodynamics, it's possible that our universe is not an isolated system. The real answer to these questions is that we do not know. We have some ideas, but we don't know for sure, and to pretend otherwise would be foolish and arrogant.
And they want it to explode, which requires energy.
No, they want it to expand, not explode. And actually, they don't want it to expand, it's just that the evidence points to it having expanded and continuing to expand. It still requires energy, and we're not entirely sure where the energy comes from, but I will point out here that there are two kinds of energy, negative energy and positive energy. Not the woo kinds where a room can have negative energy because someone was murdered in it, but the scientific kinds where gravity provides the negative energy and matter provides the positive energy. It is entirely possible that if you add up all the energy in the universe, both positive and negative, it will equal zero. So, if the universe is indeed an isolated system, then its total energy could very well be zero, and would have been zero right from the beginning of time.
The energy to come from nowhere as well. But anyway, as far as the actual laws of physics, the basic laws of physics and the first law of physics says that energy and matter cannot be created or destroyed.
And if the total energy of the universe is zero, as it appears it might be, then no energy has been created or destroyed. Also, the first law of thermodynamics is not the first law of physics. There are many physical laws. This is just the first law of the branch of physics known as thermodynamics. And it's not the first law of thermodynamics because it holds supreme importance over the others. It's that it's the most basic of the three. And you're also forgetting about the thermodynamic law that is actually even more basic than this one, the zeroth law of thermodynamics. It gets the number zero because it was first described after the other three were well established, but it is even more basic than the first. It is that if two thermodynamic systems are both in thermal equilibrium with the third one, then they are also in thermal equilibrium with each other. This principle is so basic that scientists had been working with it for hundreds of years before it was described as a law, and the main purpose of describing it as a law was to allow for a mathematical definition of temperature that can agree with the physical existence of valid thermometers.
Which is why in the book of Genesis, and I think Laura might be reading this at some stage, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth.
You do realize that you literally just accused Big Bang cosmology of not obeying the laws of physics because energy cannot be created or destroyed, right? How exactly does that make your claim, where you say right off the bat that God created this energy that cannot be created or destroyed, more plausible? Do you not see how that violates the first law of thermodynamics? That's a much more egregious violation than anything cosmologists have ever come up with.
But moving on to the second law of thermodynamics, it gets even more complex. You'll see this in the fun facts, but it gets even more complex because the second law of thermodynamics describes something called entropy. Now that's a rather technical word, so I'll make it simple for you. Entropy just describes energy systems. And energy systems always get worse, not better.
No, 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 no. That is not even close. There is no better or worse in physics. It's a measurement. And again, it only applies to isolated systems. Now, I know you're about to give an example of a hot cup of tea getting cold as this thing getting worse rather than getting better if left to its own devices, but it's not about better or worse. It's about the temperature approaching equilibrium with its surroundings. And even that is an egregious oversimplification, but at least it's an honest one.
For example, a hot cup of tea gets cold. I'm always drinking cups of tea when I'm working, and I tend to get involved in my work, and then a quarter of an hour later I've got a cup of tea and it's cold, because that's because of entropy.
Yes, it is. Now, have you ever put that cup of tea in the microwave to make it warmer again? If we're just looking at the cup of tea by itself, that's a reversal of entropy. This is why the words isolated system appear in both laws. If the system is not isolated, the law does not necessarily apply.
There are all sorts of examples of entropy, but they all cause massive problems for the evolutionists, because the evolutionists say that 13.78 billion years ago, the singularity and the energy to explode the singularity all evolved by chance.
What does chance have to do with it? What is your point here? That the universe started off with less entropy than you think it should have? Okay, so why did the universe start out with low entropy? Real answer? We don't really know. It's possible that it didn't, and it's not an isolated system, so our local low-entropy state is an illusion brought on by the fact that our universe is not an isolated system. There's also the fact that when we're talking about a low-entropy universe here, we're talking about immediately after the Big Bang, when the universe contained a nearly evenly distributed amount of hydrogen and helium. The overall increase in entropy is actually what gives us a universe we can live in, where the slight lumps of gas group together gravitationally to eventually form stars. So going back to your thing of entropy makes things worse, would you consider a perfectly uniform cloud of hydrogen and helium that is spaced in such a way that it will never gravitationally attract to form anything else to be better or worse? Because there's a lot less entropy in a uniform gas cloud than there is in a universe with stars and planets.
God has put that in the original Hebrew, but he's actually put his stamp on this. I've mentioned this many times before, but it is so important. There are 7 words there in the Hebrew. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, but they all have a numeric value. They all have a numeric value. And in the gematria, that's the numeric value of the words, there are 3 nouns, God, heaven and earth. And if you add up the gematria of the value of the 3 words, God, heaven and earth, it comes to 777.
Okay, so I'm not going to go in depth into this numerology crap, but I do just want to point out a fact that I'm sure everyone here already knows. With a book as large as the Bible, if you start looking for numerical trends, you'll find them if you look hard enough just because of how many words there are. But I would also just like to bring up the fact that in the gematria, the method that he's talking about of arriving at numeric values for the words, there are 24 different methods that you can use to arrive at different numbers for the same word. With over 6,000 Hebrew words in the Bible and 24 different ways of assigning numeric values to each word, you're bound to force some patterns out of it if you try hard enough.
So, if you get those, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, there are actually 28 letters in those 7 words, and 7 words. If you multiply all the letters up, a very big number, and then multiply all the words up and divide the top line, the multiplication of all the letters, divided by the multiplication of all the, or the product of all the words, you get, guess what? Pi, 3.14.
Just for shits and giggles, I checked the math on this. A few times, actually, because of all the different potential methods of arriving at the numbers for the words and letters, though I certainly did not do an exhaustive study of all 24 methods. But guess what? I got numbers ranging from 8.4 times 10 to the 15th to 1.1 times 10 to the 21st. So that is several orders of magnitude larger than pi. But again, there are so many ways to tease numbers out of these words that I actually have no way of verifying that the method this guy used didn't come out to pi. But even if I grant him the benefit of the doubt here and say that it did, I am extremely skeptical of the claim that it came out to exactly pi. Perhaps it got the 3.14 right, but how many digits down did it match? I really want to know this.
So we're going to go to our first fun fact, and this is the first law of thermodynamics.
We just fucking did that!
I want to talk to you today about the first law of thermodynamics. This is the basic of all physics.
Is it the most basic of all physics? Let's see. Hey Google, what are the most basic concepts of physics?
I found 4 on the website brainscape.com. Classical mechanics, electromagnetism, relativity, and finally, thermodynamics.
Okay, so it looks like it's number 4 on the list, so it is pretty basic, but the most basic concept in all of physics appears to be Newton's laws of motion.
Basically, the first law of thermodynamics says that energy cannot be created or destroyed.
Okay, so in the graphic in your video, you're attributing that quote to Einstein. Did Einstein say that? I doubt it, especially since one of the understandings of his theory of relativity is that the first law of thermodynamics does not apply to the universe as a whole. Remember when I explained earlier that gravity is negative energy? An alternate explanation for this is found in the theory of relativity, where spacetime itself can absorb energy from matter and give energy to matter depending on how the spacetime is behaving. Within this context, there is actually an equation to describe how the energy and momentum evolve in response to the behavior of their surrounding spacetime. If the spacetime is still, then the total energy is constant. If it is not still, then the energy changes in a completely unambiguous and mathematically consistent way. So given this understanding of the theory of relativity, I don't think Einstein would have stated the first law of thermodynamics as if it is some sort of universal absolute. I'm skipping the rest of this as I have already talked about the first law of thermodynamics, but I just felt the need to point out a few places where he was so wrong that it was impossible to ignore.
In the sun, something extraordinary happens, totally supernatural. We can't do it. It's called nuclear fusion.
We can't do it, therefore it must be supernatural. Oh, and also we can do it, we just haven't figured out how to sustain the reaction at this point. In fact, we've used fusion to build atoms that are not likely to be possible in nature, such as the entire bottom row of the periodic table of the elements. Also, if we can't fuse elements, then H-bombs must not be a thing.
So we come back to the original statement is that energy cannot be created or destroyed. And now we look at evolution. What do they teach us?
Mostly that as populations become genetically separated from each other, they experience different selection pressures which select for or against different alleles, which cause the frequency of these alleles to change in these populations over successive generations.
Well, the evolutionists teach us that 13.8 billion years ago, there was a singularity.
No, it's the cosmologists that will teach us that. The evolutionary biologists will teach you about evolution, which has nothing to do with the beginning of the universe, save for the fact that evolution wouldn't have been possible had the universe not begun at some point. But regardless of how you think it happened, the universe is here. So even if everything you have said so far is completely correct and we don't know anything about how the universe got here, all that says is that we don't know how it got here. It's still here, and evolution still happens.
So 2 points there. First of all, the evolutionists teach us that the potential energy of the singularity created itself.
Or that it was always there, or that it's the result of another universe dying, or that a discussion of time and therefore temporal acts such as creation are meaningless before time would have existed, or any number of other options. You're really leaving a lot out.
And secondly, that it exploded, which requires energy, and they don't explain where the energy came from.
It came from the flying spaghetti monster, obviously. Sure, at this point we don't know the exact details of how all this happened, but we are figuring out more every day. It would be lazy and sloppy of scientists to run into an unknown and just give up and declare that it must have been a god, since we don't know enough to figure that one out yet. And even if I grant your entire argument, this still only gets us to a deistic god, some power that created everything and then left it to its own devices. I know you gave us some numerology as evidence for your specific god, so good for you, that's more than most creationists can manage, but it's very, very flimsy evidence, if one were even generous enough to refer to it as evidence.
So, do I believe in evolution? It's absolute rubbish. Is it a lie? Absolutely. It's complete and utter lie. There is absolutely nothing in common between the Bible and evolution.
There's also absolutely nothing in common between the theory of gravity and the Bible. Does that mean you don't believe in gravity? There's nothing in the Bible about heliocentrism. Does that make you a geocentrist? Cell theory, germ theory of disease, molecular theory, kinetic theory of gases, theory of relativity. I could go on. There are so many aspects of science that the Bible either doesn't even touch or got completely wrong, and a number of these would have been very helpful for the all-powerful creator of the universe to have passed on to us if it cared. But instead, we get blood magic as a cure for leprosy, an admonishment against washing your hands before eating, with a clarification that what goes into your mouth can't make you sick, a geocentric flat earth cosmology. If God wanted us to get our scientific knowledge from the Bible, then that God is a mischief maker trying to see how long he could hold us back before we discovered the truth for ourselves.
You mentioned that energy cannot be created or destroyed.
Oh.
And so you've basically debunked the evolution theory, haven't you?
No, you really haven't. Imagine the arrogance of these people that they think that scientists can spend their entire lives studying evolution and not notice that it's rendered impossible by one of the most fundamental scientific principles. And would you just look at the two of you sitting here talking about it as if you guys were the first people to ever even consider it?
And they basically treat the creation story in Genesis as a fairy story, basically.
I mean, if the shoe fits. But let's take a look. Okay, so the definition of fairy tale is a children's story about magical and imaginary beings and lands. Does the Genesis creation story fit this description? Well, we have a magical imaginary being, God, create the magical imaginary lands, the Garden of Eden, which then has another magical imaginary being, the serpent, talk the woman who was magically created from the man's rib into eating a magical fruit that would give her knowledge of good and evil, which results in the magical God banishing these people from the magical Garden of Eden so that they can't eat from the magical tree that gives them eternal life. The only reason I could see why this would not fit the definition of fairy tale perfectly is that you could question whether or not it is directed specifically at children. But since you are here advocating for this story to be taught to children in school instead of evolution, I'm going to go ahead and assume that you agree it is for kids. So yeah, the fairy tale descriptor fits pretty well.
Well, it's very sad that our children are being taught that evolution is as it is, because it means that they don't have a sense of, I mean, it takes away the reference of things like morality and actually loving your neighbor as yourself.
Evolution has nothing to do with morality, except for the fact that our morality is a product of evolution. As far as loving your neighbor as yourself, a secular humanist worldview would hold that all humanity are your neighbors. But in the Bible, most references to your neighbor are worded in such a way as to make it easy to interpret it as your neighbor is a fellow Jew in the Old Testament or a fellow Christian in the New Testament, meaning that the command to love your neighbor only extends to fellow believers. Which is why it was so easy for believers to justify heinous acts like the Crusades, the witch trials, the persecution of other Christian denominations, etc.
Because you're just an animal. You've just evolved from a monkey or whatever.
We are just animals who evolved from previous animals. There is no afterlife. This is the only life we get, or any animals for that matter. So try and do as much good to as many of your fellow animals as you can, that you might bring as much happiness and joy to the world as is reasonably possible. Now compare that to Christianity, where you are rewarded not for what good you do to your fellow beings, but by whether or not you accept a gruesome human sacrifice. As long as you believe in and accept this human sacrifice, you will be rewarded eternally, even if you caused more harm than good in the world in which you lived. If you don't believe in or accept this human sacrifice, then you are tormented for all eternity while those in heaven watch and take joy in your suffering, even if you made the world a better place while you were in it. Now, I'm sorry, but the system that encourages people to try and improve the only world whose existence we can actually be certain of seems superior to me over the one that encourages people to ignore the real-world consequences in favor of a potential reward after death, and will punish people who do good because they believe the wrong thing.
You know, God is giving us the answers on a plate here, isn't he, really? Yeah. I did this. Whichever way you want to look at this, it's me. I am your creator.
Okay, that's nice. The authors of the Bible made a claim when they said God did this. Now, even assuming that this claim is true, how did he do it? The science points to evolution. Well, at least for the diversity of life, though you guys seem to be conflating evolution with any science you don't like that points to a universe that is billions of years old.
Our Earth is 93 million miles away from the Sun, and we're travelling through space at 60,000 miles per second, and at the equator is spinning round at 1,000 miles an hour. However, if we were 1% closer to the Sun, we would all boil. If we were 1% further away, we would all freeze to death as one solid block of ice.
Oh, we would we? Let's just check on that. So the Earth's average distance from the Sun is 149.6 million kilometers, or 92.96 million miles. But that's just the average distance. It does vary quite a bit. The closest the Earth ever gets to the Sun, its perihelion, is 147.5 million kilometers. The farthest away it gets is 152.6 million kilometers. Now, on astronomical scales, this is rather small, but that's a difference of 5.1 million kilometers. That's almost 130 times the diameter of the Earth. It's also 3.4% of the average distance, so it varies by about 1.7% on either side of the average. Well, so much for burning up or freezing if it were only 1% different. Okay, so that's the last of their points that I want to discuss here. They do list off a bunch of properties of the Earth that, were they different, would make life as we currently have it difficult or impossible, but it says nothing to the idea that it is possible for life to exist under different parameters, several of which he mentions, such as oxygen levels. And we know that it is possible for life to exist with different oxygen levels because life does exist with different oxygen levels today, and also when life started, oxygen levels were different. So that's it for today. Today's comment of the day comes to us from this guy SL, who says, I actually can think of a reason why eating lab-grown human meat would be morally wrong. If it was grown and available to the public and people grown accustomed to the taste and then it was somehow no longer available to them, how would the people who had grown accustomed to it go about that change? Would they accept it and quit cold human-flavored turkey, or would they circumvent other methods of obtaining their cherished delicacies? I assume this person is joking. If you are, know that I found it amusing. But on the off chance that you were serious, which given other crap I've seen on the internet is actually disturbingly possible, I don't think I've ever heard of any killing sprees that were motivated by flavor. At least not direct killing, that is. Certainly factory farming could be likened to such a situation, and don't even get me started on foie gras. I don't care how delicious it is, most people would stop eating it if they had to be the ones to force feed and slaughter the geese themselves. Also, don't eat foie gras, that shit's cruel. Or at least verify that the farm it comes from doesn't force feed its geese. So on that happy note, I'm done here. Links to social media and other ways to support the channel are in the description. Remember, patrons get my videos a day early. See you next time.